right? So the way that I approach it is I like to start first and foremost with what is the product that we're selling. Ignore systems, ignore whatever. What is it that we sell? Why do people give us money for it? What does it do? And one thing that I like to do to start with is, if it's possible, actually buy that product or use that product. Yeah.
I would say, think of it as if you're the customer, when you're looking at the company, like this kind of like this ties back into like what you mentioned with like starting with the product.
Oh yeah, definitely. If you can actually be a customer, it's even better, right?
Like say for example, like you mentioned that you used to work at the airline. So so it's kind of like if you fly with them like quite often, then you kind of think about what's great about what could be better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When I worked for that airline, occasionally my team would even do overnights to see how the maintenance crew operated. It makes a big difference seeing like, oh, this is what you're doing at night, as opposed to like, oh, here's what it is, the ERP that says you're doing. Gives a lot more context. I also found people goofing off and watching cat videos, which explain some things we saw in the data, some lags. But yeah, go for it.
Mine. What airline did you work for?
Allegiant.
Allegiant.
Yeah. 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 So start with, so that's my first go-to, the product. What do we sell? Why do we sell it? Why are people giving us money? Right. From there, I like to track then to saying, well, okay, so if this is the thing that we're going to sell, and now I understand this, I felt it, I've touched it, I understand it as best as I can. Let's start thinking about our customers and like who's actually going to buy this thing. Because when we start to understand that, it's like, if we extend the Allegiant example, right? There's a certain segment of people that fly Allegiant. There's a segment of people that fly Delta. There's a segment of people that drive instead of fly. If we start understanding that, like, who are these people that actually give us money, it starts to lead you to being able to customize your experiences. It starts to help you understand of this number on a dashboard represents something tangible. So like in Allegiant's case, if I can keep going with that, they're targeting vacation travelers, people who are very budget conscious, routes that have to be more than, at the time, if it's less than 10 hours, if it's a 10-hour drive or less, they don't fly that. Very, very different from, say, Delta. Delta will fly you to Denver. Delta will fly you to Vegas. Completely different customer base, and that drives your behavior accordingly. Once you have that down, the next place that I start to look at is to say, what are these business motions? So, like, how do we actually sell this product to people? I've worked at, at one point I worked for an MLM. I worked for doTERRA for a short while, and learning like, well, how does somebody actually buy a bottle of this essential oil? Very, very kind of fascinating, right? But there's also a lot of nuance to it as well. So right now where I work, I work for a large enterprise software company. Getting to understand those business motions of like, okay, how do our sellers actually do this? When somebody requests somebody can request a quote, somebody can just give us their money with a social login rather than establishing a relationship like you would traditionally do. How do we, for us, there's different provisioning in terms of, do I have an entitlement to certain features? I have an offering that has composed of certain things, and how is this configured? And those understanding that how to actually be, how do we get to that point where people have their fingers on that keyboard and are designing and making incredible things? Really, really important. Because now that I understand that, I can understand the business processes that go into that. Now I understand of saying like, oh, entitlements need to look like this. Let's go design the systems accordingly. As opposed to the opposite, which I like to call vendor-driven design. We're going to shape our business based off of what Salesforce does out of the box. Salesforce has 100,000 plus customers. If you're generic, that works. If you're not so much, right? So at least for me, once I understand that, then I can start thinking about, okay, well, how do we even make our products or source them, right? So the previous company I worked for, it was direct to consumer teledentistry. So it's we used to have an office. It's a sad story. There used to be an office up the street from us. So now it's the question of like, okay, we're going to make these aligners. We're going to sell them to people. They're going to, how do we actually make that? Because there's a whole supply chain to that. There's metrics involved. There's efficiency. There's safety concerns. And so taking that time to like focus in on that helps drive other things for an end-to-end view. Because at the end of the day, like when we're talking about data, it's really an undercurrent that's end-to-end across enterprise. So, oops. So, once we understand that business, though, like this is where, in my mind, it starts to get really beyond operational, and we start thinking about strategy and where we sit in the marketplace. So, for example, for example, where I work right now, our strategy and one of the things that we worry about the most are startups coming and taking over, right? We're a 47-year-old company, industry leader. There's a lot of baggage that comes with. Now we can start thinking that strategy because now I understand this is how we develop this software. This is how we got that software because we acquired this company and blah, 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 blah. Now that we understand strategy, that sets us up to help guide data accordingly. Now we can start to say, oh, I understand why we're doing this. Now I can help further this thing so that we get to that point. Because again, if we're just saying, well, this is how this system works and this is how that system talks to each other, that's the next level down. Without that why, it's just arranging ones and zeros in a very, very precise order. So I actually, in the interest of time, want to skip down to the. So I've talked a lot of like these are the avenues that we cross through, right? This is where I start, then I move to this, then I move to that. But there's also that question of actually how do I do that, right? Because otherwise we're just saying, yeah, learn the business, that's great. Here's the domains. Let's talk about how you can actually learn that business, the techniques. And for me, it really starts with that mindset. A younger me got really judgmental when I saw inefficiencies. It's like, oh my gosh, you're doing that spreadsheet. And so my foundational advice is to be very, very curious and not judgmental at all. There's always a backstory of why this happened. We assume humans are rational. There were probably some incentives that they responded to. We got to this point. Or the less flattering thing is you don't know, so stop judging, right? You're not as good as you think you are. And so don't have that judgment. My next piece of advice, oh my goodness, I don't use the trackpad and it shows, is on that mindset is assume that there's that complexity and not that incompetence. Again, it's very easy to say like, I met somebody once upon a time who had built this whole procurement system that was very, very complex, all built in Microsoft Access. It was very, very, I was like, why did you do that? And it actually, I started very judgmental, very, very judgmental with that team. And I take a step back and it's like, oh no. There's a lot of customization that had to go into this. You didn't have access to the tools you needed. You are a business user. Of course, you're using Microsoft Access 2014 or whatever to get to that end point, because otherwise, there was complexity. It wasn't because you were lesser. It wasn't because you didn't have whatever. Yeah, my last point on the mindset side is understanding localized incentives. So we want to, when we don't respond to, humans don't necessarily respond to that annual bonus that they're promised if the company hits certain milestones, right? We just don't. We love it. We're cheering for it. I've got the stock ticker up during the day, and when it's green, I'm like, yes, today's not so bad. And when it's red, I'm like, today's even worse. But those company incentives aren't like, that's not necessarily what incentivizes and moves people. It certainly doesn't move me. People have localized incentives that they're oftentimes maximizing for. And when you understand that, then you can understand this is why this process has to do that. So for example, we have one group where I work. They're in charge of platforming. That's all they think about. They don't necessarily think about the commerce side of it. They're like, I'm building the best darn platform this place can use. But this data engineering team doesn't use it really well, and then the sales team doesn't use their data products very well, but it's the best darn platform you could ever imagine because that's what they're incentivized. And it puts them in a really weird spot because they can't, at the end of the year, say, well, I didn't build the best darn platform because somebody else, that I didn't have control over was successful. It doesn't really work with your incentives. Now, this isn't something you solve. I can't solve that. But this is something that you understand as you're trying to navigate this and you're trying to design to say, this person really cares about this. Let's help level them up, or let's help find a way to make them look good, because it makes this person look good and this is what they'll respond to. It's very much the rising tide raises all boats sort of thing. Oh, and I had one last one. I thought I had them all. So the other thing to watch out for mindsets on the mindset side is there is a ton of noise. And a mistake that I've made more often than I should have is listening to the most likable person, or listening to the most angry person, or listening to the wrong signals. There's a lot of noise there, and it takes a lot to kind of cut through that. And you have to understand there's also the concept of an unreliable narrator. So it's a trap you have to fall into, or that you must not fall into, to understand the localized incentives. This person may or may not have the right picture. This may or may not be exactly what you think it is. You got to find a way to cut through that noise and get down to see things as they truly are. So in terms of the actual techniques of, this is great, I've got a great mindset, I've got my plan, now how am I going to go do this? Terrible with this touchpad. The first one is people-based. I have never found, even in the agentic era, I've gotten pretty close. We write a lot of documentation, but I've never found a place to where I can just read the documentation and I can just read the wiki and I'm golden. I don't think that exists. We're getting closer.
I think it does.
Engineers think they do. Stealth startups think that it does.
That's why I don't want to talk to people.
We're actually getting close. Like I've been impressed with what I can do with. Anyways, with my slide 3 or 4 levels down. But it starts with people based. It really I found, and so what I like to do is when I find somebody that I think has a lot of good information, somebody that I want to partner with, I'll just casually say, hey, why don't we just talk one-on-one once a month? Let's just keep that open line of communication. And what I found is people that are really passionate and really knowledgeable, they love to share. And I'm part of that. If you ask me exactly what I'm working on, let's set a timer. Otherwise, I'll go long. And so that just setting that one-on-one and having those casual conversations, I find is invaluable because there's time after time after time. Like here's one that I ran into this morning of, hey, here's this thing with license compliance. People still kind of pirate our software, even in this day and age. Hey, here's this thing I came up with license compliance. I've never worked in this domain. This is what we're trying to solve. What's the one-liner on things that I should know? And the person responded, and it was great, and it was just that. Had I not had that relationship, had I not worked with this person beforehand, it's going to take a lot longer. I'm going to have to set up an intro call. I'm going to have to talk to this person. They're going to be busy. Quick casual conversations, a monthly coffee chat, whatever, really cuts through that. But like any other friendship, it goes both ways. They're going to come to you. You need to make sure that you're a good friend as well. And that when that little reminder comes up, they don't go, oh, this person, they just want to take and take and take. Don't be that person. Yeah, identifying that person, it's usually I look for the person who's their name shows up a lot in Slack, especially when there's fires. And especially if you pitch it as, I want to help you not get pinged so much, people are willing to work with you. The other ones that I have that I also find are useful is if you do have teams that have recurring meetings, see if you can be a fly on the wall. Not to, and just frame it that way, specifically to say, hey, I'd like to come to your meeting. I'm not going to talk. I'm just going to listen. Sometimes people are hesitant to add people to those meetings because they're like, oh gosh, here's this other person. They're just going to talk and they're going to derail and they're going to da 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 da. If you set that expectation up front, it can be really helpful to say, hey, look, I'm just curious. I'm just a fly on the wall. I'm not going to talk. May I be invited to this meeting, please? I find that to be really effective. Most people will say yes. You're going to have to cut out that noise because there's a lot of recurring meetings that you don't need to be on. But if you're specifically interested in, do it. So if you want to get really in, once you have that high level and you want to really start getting into the weeds, these are some techniques that I've found. Annual reports and investor decks. So my background's, my formal education's in accounting, and I actually get excited about the 100-page annual report sent to the shareholders. If you're trying to learn how does the business operate, dig into that. That's what they're telling the people that own the company. These are the things you should pay attention to. These are the things that we're going to do next year. These are the risks to the business. All of that's in those annual reports. Is it meant for somebody that's not working on Wall Street? No. You're going to have to do some legwork, or Claude's going to have to do some legwork. But it starts to become that foundation that if you want to know how the business is doing, hey, look at what they're telling their shareholders. If you don't want to read the whole 120-page report, then the earnings calls are fantastic because they're going to ask very precise questions. They're going to talk exactly about the strategy. And they're pre-recorded. You can listen to them on 2x speed if you want. There's layoffs coming up. It's also a good place to get some inside info. But that's one of my go-tos. Some of the other ones that I really like. The escalations can be really insightful to me, I find. So for example, you're going to find some Slack threads that have, you're probably going to get added to a Slack channel at some point that has a ton of history. There's going to be some fire that happened. And it's really, I find really helpful if I'm looking for a specific thing. If I'm saying, hey, the commission engine broke. How does the commission engine even work? How do we even pay people commissions? What's our commission structure? Perusing through, commission engine breakage 2024, finding those and saying, okay, this is why this is a problem. This is who touched what, not in a technical plan, but in a high level business context. I find that to be really, really helpful. It takes a bit of legwork, as does everything, but investing that time I find to be really, really helpful. At least on this slide, my other favorite one is reverse engineering dashboards, particularly executive dashboards. There's companies have hundreds of dashboards, and 99% of them usually don't matter. But if you can find those executive dashboards for whatever division, I find that a rich, rich source of saying, okay, the director of product cares about this enough to read this every day. If I want to learn how do we develop our products, let me see what they are looking at and work backwards from there. And so that's another rich source. It gives you some hints of what to pay attention to, especially with picking out from the noise. Let me talk on, if you want to get into the dark side of it a little bit, headcount tells you a lot. Budgets tell you a lot of what the company values and what matters to you, what matters most. So on headcount in particular, some kind of fun metrics you can look at is, hop open your HR tool, get your AI to do it, and look at ratios of different departments in regards to each other. And that can start to give you a benchmark. Like, what's your developer to product management ratio? What's your PM to engineer? Or what's your TPM to engineer ratio? And when you start seeing some of those things, it starts to kind of give you an idea of where that money's going. It also provides a signal of what to pay attention to. So a good example is when I worked for Allegiant, the marketing budget wasn't, like, the marketing headcount wasn't that big. Now, in terms of like ratios, but when I worked for Autodesk, it's a bit bigger, and so that starts to give you a hint as to where that money's being spent. The other one that I really like on this slide is also understanding your business calendar. I'm going to show my cynicism a little bit of why does an arbitrary date on a calendar matter so much for earnings or driving productivity or goals or things like that. I don't know why, but it does. And so understanding where that calendar is and these key events makes a big difference. So not just for, earnings, like the quarter closes on here, but also understanding how different departments have different things that they respond to. So one example of this would be, so like where I work right now, enterprise architecture has a different set of calendars compared to developers. Developers are very quarterly minded. And then it's like, this has to be delivered by this quarter, blah, 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 blah. Here's this big project. Our calendar that we have, where our deliverables are required, completely different. And so understanding, like, oh, I support this group here, understanding the timeframes they work on makes a huge difference. It often explains behavior. It also explains how hot fixes and temporary solutions that are always permanent got implemented, and why, driving more of that why to help you design accordingly. It also gives you something to bump up against. If somebody might not say, oh, I need to deliver. It's like, why does this have to be delivered now? Because I have an arbitrary deadline, but I don't want to say that out loud. If you understand that, it kind of helps alleviate that a little bit. The the other one that the other ones that I like too is going more of like experience wise. I've gone with sales reps on demos before. I find it really eye opening. This was at Byte. I'd go to a bunch of sales calls, as they're trying to, get people to straighten your teeth, sort of thing. Listening in on those gave me an appreciation for not being a sales rep, but because that's just not who I am. But it's also gets really helpful as we start saying, okay, if we're trying to increase sales, let's see what the seller experience is. This is what they're doing every day. They're not going to necessarily raise their hands and say, I'm doing 20 clicks. Let's fix that. There's a little bit of somebody peeking around the corner and saying, oh, you're doing some Excel ETL? That sucks. Let's not do that. I know exactly how to fix this. Let's do this thing instead. Or understanding like, oh, you have like, oh, here's a blind spot that maybe you didn't see because I happen to know this other thing from talking to this other group. How do we bring you all together? But you're not, if you're waiting for somebody to raise their hand and say, go do this thing, it's never going to happen. If you go and experience it with them, then it becomes more apparent. And you have a lot more empathy when they're getting yelled at. I feel for salespeople. It's not a fun job. Yeah, and some of these others I hit on, use that product yourself. I have AutoCAD installed, even though I'm not an engineer. I click around on it. I didn't get my teeth straightened, but I got my teeth whitened. I blew on a Legion a few times, but things like that. Last one. So there's a theme here, right? I've talked knowledge. Go do all this knowledge. That doesn't scale. If there was one person in a company that could know everything, then it would be a lemonade stand. Where you're
Startup.
or a stealth startup that sells lemonade.
Hey.
So this is where, now that you've gained all this context, it's worthwhile to build out your own library. It's worthwhile to set up something in Claude Code, something that you can start querying against, things there you can take notes. Dictations are fantastic. I love them. Mine is full of stuff where I'm like, I just say, here's word salad. Here's everything I know about this. Ready, go. All of my meetings have transcript. I have transcription on now. Send it to Claude Code. It just sits on my desktop for now. I don't need to build anything big. You're gaining tons and tons of context, but you're not smart enough. So your brain's just not that big. So leverage Claude for that. It's also really helpful that I've got my MCP set up for our Confluence pages. I have it set up for our Airtables. I have it set up for our Snowflake deployment. You can start using that to research and build that in. Because once you have that, then it becomes really easy. Because I don't remember 9 months ago, but I don't remember a single meeting from 9 months ago. But, well, if I had Claude Code then, it wouldn't. But it's able to go back and retrieve that. And once you get it to a really good point, you can start having it quiz you. That's one technique I like to use with this, is saying, hey, I'm trying to learn this concept. Write a quiz for me based off of what you know. And let's see how smart I am. And I usually don't do great, but it's the exercise that matters, not the grade. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on techniques for learning the business and how to do that. I do want to turn it over for questions, comments, thoughts from the group, or bonus pizza time.
Have you ever been trying to learn the business and reaching out to these folks, and it's taking a week or two for them to reply to your Slack message or your email?
Move on. It's okay. They're not obligated. I would say just move on and look for a different resource or look for a different person. There's surely at least one person out there that's willing to talk to you, but you're going to get ignored. That's okay. sometimes you're the one that has to do the ignoring, right? If you're working sun up to sundown, then you don't have time. And so that's my advice.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
What would you say your like ratio would be of like networking within your company, which is kind of what I'm gathering from this, versus actually doing things with the gaining of knowledge and getting the work done? Like, what's your ratio of that?
Great question. So I've tried in the past to like block off time for this. I found that that's ineffectual. That it just doesn't happen. So what I've found works instead is while I'm on the topic, while I'm working with the domain, investing a little bit more time. Taking that extra 30, 60, 90 minutes, whatever, and just say, oh, I'm going to go be curious on this. And here's my techniques. And I'm going to go employ those. Yes, please.
So say you join a new company and most of the people that built the system have left.
Mhm.
And there's like a couple people that there was some overlap, but even they don't really know what the legacy systems are doing besides taking Claude and pointing it at it, because I took Claude and pointed at it and Claude gave me wrong things.
That happens.
How would you advise of like figuring out what the system's doing and how it's working?
I'd start with the business context first, actually. That there's going to be mountains and mountains of tech debt behind there. Some of it will matter and some of it won't, and sometimes you won't know what matters until it's too late. But if you start with the business context, then it helps align everything else, because you'll never be able to understand the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lines of code. And now once you have I'm trying to solve for X because it's important because of Y, then you can go back and start looking for that specific feature, functionality, whatever. And in my experience, when I've encountered those situations, a lot of things just kind of die on the vine anyways. Because it's like, well, if there's nobody here to support it and we don't know what it's doing, why? Sure. Other questions? Yes, please.
Where do you differentiate between the 0 and 1 to represent the Y versus the business context to represent the Y?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Are you saying like the difference between logical and physical?
Yes.
I mean, I would say like the 0 and 1, like we haven't talked about physical implementations at all, right? And I've intentionally avoided that. Once you have that, what I like to call the business architecture, then the tools match. Then you decide your tools. Then you decide your stack. Then you decide all the things, and that's what supports it. Or you cut things from the stack, or you don't take on projects, and the physical manifestation of follows. I don't know if that's exactly what you're asking. I'm not sure if we're on the same brainwave, but
No, I love that. Thank you. I think of inference from just code itself, and there's someone I'm talking to that's 700 repos, and there's always 80 lines of code that no one could interpret. And that's just simply this. And I love what you're saying here because that matches exactly what I do. But past that point, I'm trying to answer that question. Why is it that maybe a principal engineer that knows his zeros and ones, like 0 and 1, why does he still persistently assume he can get it from, I don't know, an engineer that does not represent themselves as saying, I can infer that from the code if you know what you're looking for?
well,
Wrong.
I agree with you.
so okay, I had an experience at Snowflake at Data for Breakfast that really like put this in my head. So I was sitting at, this is in the back half. There's a vendor presenting, and they're saying, look how great this is. You can, in plain text, anybody can write what they want and it'll come and be built. Isn't this a wonderful product? You should all buy it. And in my head, I thought, that is wonderful that the cost of software development in your system has gone down to zero. That is really cool. But what I question is, why is it being built? What are those natural gates? You can have feature after feature after feature, but if you don't understand your strategy, then it doesn't matter. And so in your case, saying like, well, I can infer this for code, that assumes that it had a good reason for being built in the first place. And oftentimes it doesn't, because we respond to localized incentives. My go-to example of this when I talk to product managers is, or technical, or those senior principal engineers, I like to put it in this context of saying, do you remember when you first started out and how you probably had a dashboard that showed how many tickets you closed? Maybe you even said, this is how many lines of code I wrote this week. Maybe you're a product manager and like, this is how many projects I drove. Am I not wonderful? Look at this big, huge number. It's 1,000, it's 10,000. I'm so great. Now we look back now as seasoned professionals and say, how silly were we? That was so silly, right? I'm not a great developer because I wrote lines of code. I'm not a great product manager because I closed out whatever was on that Airtable over and over and over again. Those are inputs. We care about outputs. And so the same way that we look at our younger selves and think how silly we were, we have to evaluate ourselves too in our current state. Because now, like most people in this room are a little more seasoned. Is what I'm building actually mattering? Or am I still in this, am I just a more seasoned, this is how many tickets I closed mentality because there's something arbitrary pushing down on me to say, if you don't, blah, 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 bad things will happen. Very wordy answer to a very short question. Hopefully I made some sense in there.
Well, I'll just double down on buying that stock because I just talked to the CTO at a local company here, and he brilliantly told me he needs sales-led product. Again, this is a startup, and they said this way. We started by asking questions to our customers. Now we're just building features, and we're starting to see the tech then. They have 200 feature flags. That's his point he was making.
I think there's a good quote from Henry Ford has that famous quote about horses and faster horses and cars. There's a little bit of that. Is kind of what I'm hearing. Yeah. Other questions?
So, being as data analyst for the past couple of years, I feel like I've gotten a really good understanding of business and like learning about different areas and kind of using this process more or less. But as I've started to get more interested in becoming an engineer or like interested in the data engineering side of things, more back-end type stuff, I'm kind of nervous that since I won't be interacting with the people, like the stakeholders face to face as much, like it would be kind of like a layer removed.
Mhm.
I'm kind of nervous that I'll be too focused on the data side of things rather than the business.
Gotcha.
So what's the good technique to kind of maintain like my knowledge of the business while also understanding how the data side of things works?
I'd say coffee chats, casual walks, like that internal networking, I think is what somebody called that. I think that's where it is. I'm always amazed. So I'm on where I work. We have some internal conferences and I'm on the steering committee for them. And the way that I drive those is saying, we have these presentations. That's cool. What's really valuable is getting these people in the same room that normally don't talk to each other or can't talk to each other. And the same principle applies. If you can find a reason, if you can find the right person to have those back channel conversations, you'll get a lot more out of it than somebody writing something on a wiki or some sort of initiative where we're going to do a 3-hour design sprint where we're all going to sit together, and it's challenging. Yeah, Bill.
To add a thought or a
Sure.
question. At my last company, when I first started, the CTO had lots of direct reports. Didn't want to have another one, so he put me under the director of data engineering. And at that time, all the data engineers were ticket takers. They just pick something off the board and go work on it. Later, they aligned so that the data engineers were focused on one or two departments or portfolios. So they get deeply into the knowledge problem domain of that department. And that worked out a lot better.
Absolutely.
That way, they were still working with the business people, the salesmen, marketing folks.
I wish it was my saying, but it's definitely not. If it helps, a one-liner, kind of to what Bill says, is you want to pitch yourself as an order shaper, not an order taker. Oh, other questions, comments? Stick me in a room with my favorite dogs.
Sorry.
What?
Comment you made that was perfectly defined on true cells. So
Oh, it's somebody else said it and I picked it up.
good.